Hi, my name's Paul Salazar, and I'm here to tell you about the Omnijig. I have used the Omnijig extensively in my shop and in both my advanced and basic router seminars, and have found it to be the finest and easiest piece of equipment to use to cut dovetails. I'd like to take some time now to show you the Omnijig in use and to give you a few tips and techniques to make the setup and operation of your Omnijig very quick and easy. Dovetail jigs are primarily used to cut dovetails for drawer construction. Machine-cut dovetails, those cut with a router and a template, are most often distinguished by set spacing and size of the dovetails themselves. The primary purpose of using dovetail construction for drawers is to add mechanical strength to the drawer joint so that it can withstand thousands of openings and closings. This would be the drawer front and this the drawer side here. And due to the dovetail construction, as I pull on the forward portion, the front portion of this drawer, there is great mechanical strength there even without glue, and the joint will not come apart. Equipment needed to cut the half-inch, half-blind dovetails includes a router, preferably of 1.5 horsepower or better, the half-inch, half-blind dovetail template, a half-inch dovetail bit, the Allen wrench, and your 5/8" guide bushing. All of these items are provided with the Omnijig. Additional items that you'll find helpful in setup of the Omnijig include a fine lead mechanical pencil, a 9/16" wrench, an accurate ruler, a T-handled hex wrench, a square, a sharp knife or razor, a depth gauge, and a can of paste wax. One other item that I find very helpful when cutting dovetails is a simple block of wood with a large hole cut in it so that I can set my router down with the exposed router bit and not worry about it cutting into my workbench. The Omnijig is easy to use and setup is simple. Let's begin with the half-inch, half-blind dovetail. When using the Omnijig for the first time, make sure that it is securely mounted to a workbench or a stand such as this, with the front edge of the Omnijig projecting beyond the edge of the table of the workbench so that your boards can be slid down in front and clamped into position without interference of your table. For the initial setup, loosen your adjustable stops and slide them out of the way. They will be adjusted later for the proper setup. Next, adjust the front clamp for the thickness of the material you'll be using. Place the material behind the clamp, put pressure in at the bolts, and tighten the nuts from behind until you have your clamp spaced evenly both on the left and right hand side. Check to make sure that the clamp holds the material securely by lowering the lever and putting pressure against your material with the cam. After the front clamp is adjusted, adjust the top clamp for the thickness of that material. Again, place your material under the clamp, press down at the bolts, and tighten the nuts from underneath. Do this both on the left and right hand side, and after this is done, again, check to make sure that pressure is being put on your board evenly with the cam. After your clamps are adjusted, take your side piece of your drawer, insert it behind the front clamp, approximately 1/4 inch above the surface, and lock in place. Next, take what would be your front of your drawer, place it under the top clamp, butt it firmly up against your side piece, and lock it into position. The finger template for your half-inch, half-blind dovetail joints comes in a separate box and is unassembled. Loosely attach the brackets with the screws provided and attach it to your Omnijig behind the knobs, making sure that it's level, and tighten these in position. Next, take an Allen wrench, tighten down the screws, and you will be assured of perfect alignment for your finger template. By the way, I am using a T-handled Allen wrench, which is not provided with the Omnijig, which I find a little more convenient to use than the standard Allen wrench. After we adjust the clamps and assemble the template, the next step is to adjust the template position on the jig. Loosen the knobs and remove the template from the Omnijig. As you notice, there are 3 black washers here. I have found through experience that general positioning of 2 washers behind and 1 in front of the bracket puts you in the general ballpark of positioning the template on the jig. Next, place your template back on the Omnijig. Hold the template flush to your top piece of material and tighten the left-hand knob. Next, loosen the bracket, move your material to the right-hand side of the fixture, tighten the bracket, again place some pressure on top of the template and tighten the right-hand knob. This will ensure that your template is parallel to the top surface of your Omnijig. In order to cut dovetails, we must make 3 more adjustments on the Omnijig. Generally, these measurements and adjustments can be done with a ruler. From the very front edge of your top board to the back portion of your finger template, we must measure and adjust the finger template to 19/32 of an inch. This must be done on both the left and right hand side of the template. The second critical dimension is the dimension from the edge of the template to the edge of the board, and this must be 3/16 of an inch. And finally, the third critical dimension is the relationship of the front board to the top board. And the left edge of the front board must be 7/16 of an inch from the left edge of your top board. Now I'd like to show you a simple and accurate method of making these adjustments on your Omnijig. First of all, you'll need a piece of material to go under your front clamp. You need a pad of paper, a mechanical pencil with some fine lead, a depth gauge, and a square. Set your depth gauge for 19/32 of an inch. This is the distance from the back of your finger template to the front edge of your top board. In order to draw a very fine line, take your mechanical pencil and while rotating it, sharpen the point. Make a mark on both the left and right-hand side of your board. Next, take your square, line it up with those marks, and draw a very thin line all the way across your board. Next, readjust your depth gauge to 3/16 of an inch. This is the distance from the left and right side of your board that your finger template must be adjusted over. Place your depth gauge on your board and towards the front edge of the board, make a thin line. It's 3/16 inch from the edge on both the left and right-hand side of the board. Next, place your board in a vise. Readjust your depth gauge to 7/16 of an inch. This is the distance that your front board is going to be offset from your top board. Make a mark on both the left and the right-hand side of your board. Extend those marks with a square. We now have all 3 critical dimensions, both for the left and the right-hand side, on the board. The distance of 19/32, the distance of 3/16, and the distance of 7/16. Now that we have a marked setup board, let me show you the easy way to make accurate adjustments on the Omnijig. First, take your front board and bring it up underneath the bracket until it projects above the top surface of the Omnijig by about 1/4 of an inch, and lock it in position. Next, take your marked setup board and slide it under your top bracket and under the finger template all the way over to the left and butt it up against your front board and lock it in position. As you can see, our finger template is too far back in relationship to our setup line that is 19/32 of an inch from the front edge of our board. In order to make this minute adjustment in relationship of the finger template to the front edge of the board, we must use a 9/16 inch wrench on the rod nuts behind the bracket of the finger template and move the finger template, in this instance, forward until the back edge of that finger template is lined up with that line. Make the same adjustment on the right-hand side of the template. It does help to take the stops out temporarily as you're making this adjustment. It's much easier to get the wrench in. Next, move your materials back to the left-hand side. Raise the front board approximately 1/4 inch above the top surface, lock it in position. Move your top board over and butt it against your front board. Slide it over until our setup line of 3/16 of an inch is right in line with this edge of the template. Lock the board in position. Slide the top left stop over until it hits your top board and lock it in position. Make the same adjustments for the right-hand side. Move your front board over until it projects slightly above the surface of the jig. Lock it in position. Next, move your setup board over. Again, positioning it so that the 3/16 inch mark is right even with the edge of your template. Lock it in position. Move your right top stop over until it butts against the board and tighten it down. Next, we must adjust the front board in relationship with the top board. Move your front board over until the right edge lines up perfectly with our 7/16 inch mark on our setup board. Lock the board in position, slide your stop over, and then tighten your stop. Next, we must make the same adjustment to the other side of the fixture. Move your front board over. Make sure it's projecting slightly above the top of the fixture. Lock it in position. Move your top board over until it butts against your left stop, which is fixed in position now, and butt against the front board. Lock it in position. Now reposition the front board so that the left edge of it lines up perfectly with our 7/16 inch setup mark. Lock the board in position. Slide the left front stop over until it butts against the board and lock the left stop in position. The Omnijig is now set up to make our first trial cut for a dovetail. Before we cut our dovetails for the first time, we must set up our router. First, we must put our 5/8 inch guide bushing on our router base. This is done simply by inserting the guide bushing inside of the router base and placing the lock ring on the back side and tightening it. Notice that the guide bushing projects slightly beyond the base of the router. The guide bushing will run along your template, with the router bit projecting through the guide bushing. This way, the router bit will not cut your template. Take your 1/2 inch dovetail router bit and insert it in your router. Run it all the way down and back out slightly. And tighten your collet. Assemble your router. And adjust the depth of cut to 21/32 of an inch. Now with our Omnijig and our router set, we're ready to make our first dovetail cut. But first, let me give you a little tip. I have found that using a little bit of paste wax on the template itself and on the base of the router will make your cutting a lot smoother. In order to cut our dovetails, we first want to make a cut across the front of the board in what we call a climb cut, to cut a clean shoulder on your pin board. And then, moving the bushing in and out of the template, we will cut both pins and tails simultaneously. Make sure you place the router firmly and level on your finger template. Our first cut is going to be across the face of the pin board. Make sure that your router is totally off before you remove it from the template. Slide it out and set it down. Check and make sure that you have a clean cut all the way across. Notice that both your pins and tails were cut simultaneously. This was done with this 7/16 inch offset that we set up on the template. Now we want to check for fit. Remove the pieces of material from the Omnijig. And see how they fit. Getting the Omnijig fine-tuned for perfect dovetails requires some sample cuts. That's why I asked you to prepare plenty of scrap to the same dimensions as your finished drawers. There are three basic problems that you can have with the fit of your dovetails. Number one, your joints can be too loose or too tight. Number two, the joints can seat too deeply or not deep enough. And three, you can have a gap at one end of your dovetail or the other. First, a joint that is too loose will be very sloppy and have plenty of gap up here. In order to make a correction for this, you want to make a deeper cut. By 1/32 of an inch increments, make a trial cut until you get a good tight joint. A joint that is too tight, on the other hand, will not fit together properly or may have to be pounded together. In order to make a correction for this type of cut, you want to raise your bit, make a shallower cut, again in increments of a 32nd of an inch until you get a good tight fit. The